hear us clearly? My name is Beata Segleti. On behalf of the Netherlands-Hungarian Chamber of Commerce, Dutcham, I warmly welcome you to this session. Our speaker today is Lennard de Klerk from Irota EcoLodge. And I don't know whether you know already that this is Hungary's first and for the time being only climate neutral holiday resort. Lennard will share us this afternoon his experience with driving a fully electric car for longer trips, so not only within Hungary, but also abroad. And he will share tips and tricks and own experience, what it takes to drive a fully electric car on long-haul drives. So I would like to give the floor to Lennard.
Yes,
thank you. You can hear him well as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beata, for the introduction. A warm welcome from my side as well for all the attendees. We have, as I see now, 23 people attending, and probably some other people will join this this webinar a little bit later. But 4 o'clock is 4 o'clock, so let's get started. Today, I would like to present to you my personal experience in driving with an electric car. I will do that by giving you a presentation which will take approximately 40 minutes. And there will also be 2 possibilities for you to ask questions during the presentation. You can actually, if you already want to pose a question, you can do that in the screen that you see to the right of your screen, and there is an item which is called questions. So if you already have the questions, please feel free to ask them, but I will only answer them at 2 moments in the presentation. So you should now be able to see the presentation, and I just start off with a picture of Slovakia. We just crossed the high Tatra mountains, and we're charging our car. This webinar, what will it contain? First of all, I'll do a brief introduction about myself and the reason for us to switch to electric driving. I will present 2 trips that I made in the beginning of this year. One is a long-haul trip from Hungary to Zevenum in the Netherlands, and I will do another trip which is a round trip around the Baltic Sea. And the reason why I picked these 2 trips, because so far electric driving is common for short distances within cities. However, it becomes interesting when you're driving for a longer distance. And with these 2 trips, one is one long haul and the other a round trip, I'll just share my experiences, whether this is an easy thing to do. After I've explained the 2 trips, I will touch upon who can recharge your car, what are the costs involved, but also what are the carbon emissions associated with refilling your car. I also will touch a little bit more on electric driving in Hungary. What are the latest developments? How is, for example, the charging infrastructure developing in Hungary? Who are the providers? And I will do also an outlook where I see developments going in the coming 2-3 years. And as I mentioned, we will then have also a question and answer session. But before we start, actually, I would like to do a little poll, and I would like to ask you, first of all, to indicate what car you currently are driving. and you will see a pop-up screen, and you can then, by submitting it, show the results. And I see that the votes are coming in. 55% so far has voted. So let's wait for another 20 seconds. 55% voted, 45 still can vote. Okay, I see indeed two people mentioning that it's not working. That might be a little bug, unfortunately. Sorry about that. That sometimes you are not able to click on the answer. I'm going to close the poll now and share you the results. So 60% drive fossil car, 30% hybrid, and quite a high number of electric drivers are already on board, and just a few people not having a car. Then the next poll is, what will be your next car? So if you would have to buy a new car in the near future, what car you are thinking about purchasing? Okay, votes are coming in very quickly. I'll just give it a couple of seconds more. Okay, I'm closing the poll now and share you the results. And well, of course, I expected that a lot of people would be interested in buying an electric or hybrid car, but I must say that these numbers are quite high, and only 8% is considering sticking to fossil fuel. So that's from an environmental perspective, at least, a good result. Okay, I'm continuing with the presentation. Just one moment. Briefly about myself, I'm a Dutch national living in Hungary since 2007. My background is climate change, helping heavy industry in Central and Eastern Europe reducing carbon emissions, that time under the Kyoto Protocol. If some of you still remember, that was before we had the Paris Agreement. After that, after moving to Hungary and moving to Irota, I built a sustainable holiday resort in the village of Irota, which is in northern Hungary. And it was my ambition, instead of helping others to reduce their carbon emissions, I wanted to build a holiday resort which is climate neutral, which we managed and are operating since 2016. And why electric? Because I want to live a carbon-free life, both in private and in business life. And that's actually not easy, because our society is still based on fossil fuels. Everything product you buy, every trip you take, it involves in burning of fossil fuels. However, there are still quite a lot of steps and interventions you can do yourself to reduce your climate, your carbon footprint. As I mentioned, in business, we are already carbon neutral, and in private, we have solar panels on our roof to generate our own electricity. We are using biomass for heating our house. But the largest source of emissions remain transport. And I'm just showing you here a graph. These are the carbon emissions over the past 4 years for 2 persons, and these have been quite significant. And just to give you an idea, an average house or an average person emits 5 tons of CO2 related to traveling. And as you can see, for 2 persons, we are even above that. In 2017, for example, we emitted more than 12 tons of CO2. Most of it was because of flying to family in the Netherlands, flying for holiday trips. So in 2019, in May 2019, we took the decision to stop traveling. We didn't realize actually that we would be so trend-setting, as hardly anybody is flying nowadays. But of course, this is has a different reason. So my last flight was in May 2019, and as you can see, the emissions as a result reduced significantly. However, you see here still the yellow is the emissions as a result of fossil fuels for the car. And there the solution is switching to electric. So in early 2019, we ordered a Hyundai Kona Electric, which is a small SUV car. Important for us because the clearance of an SUV is higher than a normal car, and we live here in the countryside where the roads are not always that good. So if, for example, we would have bought a Tesla, then we'd be afraid that at the first pothole, the battery would get damaged. The battery pack of this car is 64 kilowatt hours. This is a very important element of any electric car, is how much electricity can the battery store. Average consumption of 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometer, and a nominal range of 400 kilometer. And also the price, I mean, electric cars are still expensive. The net price is 40,000, or was 14,000 euros, or 13 million forints. And this includes the 1.5 million forint state support. So this is the way the car looks. It's here at the charging station in Poland. And just have a quick look under the hood. It's fairly empty. The electric motor is the main element. You see here cooling liquid for the battery to cool or to warm the battery to keep it within the necessary temperature range. And this is the braking fluid for the brakes. But basically, that's all. And before I start explaining the 2 trips, it's important to know that there are 2 ways of charging your car. The first one are the regular chargers. They're also called normal chargers or street chargers. In Hungarian, they're called gyors töltők. The elementary here is that the conversion of alternating current supplied by the grid into direct current needed by the battery takes place in the car. And this equipment is quite heavy. Therefore, the charging power, the speedness which you can charge your car is fairly limited. It ranges from 3.6 kilowatt to 22 kilowatt charging capacity. And as a result, it takes typically 6 to 10 hours for a full charge. So that's something you won't do on a long trip, but if you park your car overnight, then at the next morning you will have a full battery. The other technology are the fast chargers, in Hungarian the villám töltők, and here the direct current is directly supplied to the car. And here the charging power is much larger. It can go up to 350 kilowatt, which is quite big. Actually, there do not exist car yet that can absorb that amount of power. But the typical capacity of a fast charger is 50 kilowatt. And as a result, charging goes much quicker. If you charge your car from 10 to 80%, it takes you, depending on the car and depending on the capacity of the charger, 30 to 60 minutes. So let's move now to the trip. I see that it's taking time for people to show the slide. So we were here. We are in Irota in northern Hungary, just north of Miskolc. And if we want to drive to the Netherlands, we have several ways: going over Budapest to Vienna, going north over Krakow and Leipzig. But the easiest way for us is actually to drive through Slovakia and Czech Republic. However, this trip is 1,500 kilometers, which is fairly long to do in one day. So we decided to take the train, and by doing this, putting the car on the train, reducing the amount of kilometers that we had to drive with the car. And just to show you how this looks here, I'm just dropping off the car on, because it's a railway station. It's overnight, so you get a sleeping wagon included, and the next morning you arrive ready to take the trip. So the total trip that we needed to drive was 860 kilometers. And I thought, you know, the nominal range of the car is 400 kilometers, so maybe we needed to charge the car 2 times, but basically 2 chargings should have been sufficient. However, on a highway you drive quicker, and the car is using more electricity, about 10%. It might be raining, there might be snow, you might have headwind, increasing the electricity consumption with 7.5%. We went in winter, so we needed also to heat the car, and this is typical for an electric car. There is no waste heat coming from your fossil fuel motor, so you need also the electricity from your battery to heat the car. So if you add it all up, your range drops from 400 to 300 kilometers. Okay. But here comes also one of the limitations of fast charging, that the fast chargers on the way can only charge your car to 80%, and that has to do with it's a technical limitation, but you cannot simply put that enormous amount of electricity at high speed when your car is, when your battery is almost full. So basically you can charge up to 80%. At the same time, you also always want to have some spare capacity in your battery. You don't want to drive it all to 1%. When it turns out to be it's not 1 but -1, you are stuck somewhere half the way. So 10% is a safety margin, meaning that in fact you're not using 100% of your battery capacity, but only 70%. So your usable range is just only 210 kilometers. So that was a bit of a bummer to realize that in fact only 50% of the nominal range was available. You, thank God, do have planning tools to plan such a trip. So here you can see on the graph what it turned out to be. We had 4 stops where we had possibility to charge the car. And as you can see, for example, in Dresden, it took 27 minutes. Here in Göttingen, 31 minutes. So I'll just show it here in table form. Overall, we needed 4 stops, and the total charging time you can see here in the bottom, which is 1 hour and 45 minutes. If you look at the driving time of 7.5 hours, so you have to add it up, you end up in a total trip time of 9 hours and 15 minutes. So one of the findings for this long haul trip was that usable range is limited. So you need more shorter stops to charge your car. The total charging time is not excessive, in my view. The drive is just a bit longer than usual. And if you would be driving a fossil fuel car, you'd also stop for 1 hour, for example, to have lunch. With driving an electric car, it simply means you have more stops, shorter breaks, but it's not that much longer. The fast charging network is developing very quickly, but it's still limited. So it makes planning essential. Like I mentioned, you had 210 kilometers of range for this when it's cold and if you're driving this car. But it doesn't mean that exactly every 210 kilometers there is a charging station available. But it's going very quickly. And just to show you here an example of the Ionity network. Ionity is a corporation of mainly German car manufacturers, and they are building fast and ultra-fast chargers at neck-breaking speed. And if you just see here in the chart, 2 years ago, there were simply no charging and fast charging stations at all. If we now look at where we stand today, it's 225, and another 100 are being constructed. So it's going very quickly. It's going very quick. Next trip. Round trip around the Baltic Sea. We did it in February, March of this year. A 3-week trip visiting 13 cities, crossing 7 countries, and traveling a total of 4,500 kilometers. And here there were not many long hauls involved. So finding sufficient fast chargers was not that important, but it was more how can we make sure that in each country we can activate charging. And initially I thought that, well, is it possible to do such a trip? Because is there any charging infrastructure available at all in, for example, the Baltic states? And I was pleasantly surprised to see that they have quite a lot available. And I show you here 2 pictures, which on the left side are the fast chargers. As you can see in Lithuania and Latvia, there are almost more than 100 available. The picture to the right shows you the street chargers. If you would zoom in, you would see that there would be many more. So I thought, well, that's an easy go. Not much planning is needed. However, chargers do not accept bank cards. You also cannot pay cash like you can do in a normal petrol station. So, you know, I started diving into the matter and realized that, you know, for all those 7 countries we're going to visit, we had to make sure we find the right providers. And I'm just showing here a list of the major providers that we found on the way. It is not a complete list. There are even smaller providers, but in Slovakia and in Poland, for example, we have more than one company that you have to contact and get a contract in order to get your car charged. For example, here I show you a screenshot of all the apps that I've installed on my computer with all the different apps. But I can also show you here the physical tokens. This is Slovakia, Estonia, Poland, Germany, Sweden, again Estonia, and the Shell recharge card for different countries. Sorry, I have more of them. Sorry to bother you, but this is Hungary, again Sweden, and this is a token for more countries as well. So I had to order it in advance, make sure that they posted it, that it arrived in time in Hungary before we could take the trip.
I'm sorry, Lennard, to interrupt. I'm Beata, and I just see in the dashboard that somehow it says that we are almost finished. So there's something wrong with the timing. I just recreated the webinar and sent the invitation to all the guests. So if something happens, then everyone can join in with the link that is sent in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, it's something technical thing, but for everyone, if something happens, then you can relog with that link. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the findings of this round trip. Unfortunately, there is not an integrated charging infrastructure. Each country has its own provider, or one or more providers that you need to contact. On the upside, sufficient charging stations, and our experience was that all the stations worked. We never arrived at a charging station that simply didn't. We could not get started. Also, the availability was no problem. It only happens twice, I think, that we arrived at the charging station which was used by somebody else, so we had to wait a little bit more. Of course, there's a question, how long is that going to take as more people start driving electric? But so far, so good. And unfortunately, planning is essential as well, not so much because of the amount of stations, but as I mentioned, you have to get your keys, your physical keys, or your applications up and running. There was only one case where it was a bit tricky, and that was the trip from through eastern Poland to Kaliningrad. You can see it here. We started off in Lublin with a full battery, and we just had arrived at the charging station with 8%. In eastern Poland, there are not many charging stations available. So if we would have more headwind or a lower temperature than planned, then we might have had a problem by not be able to reach the charging station. The other problem was when we tried to cross the border into Russia, on our way to Kaliningrad. And I can show you a picture here at the border. Russia is a very bureaucratic country. Those who've been there know that I think Russians have invented it. And if you enter the country with a car, you always have to fill out a custom declaration and to temporarily import a car. The problem was at some point they asked us the cubic capacity of our motor, and as we have an electric car, there is unfortunately no cubic capacity. You cannot say how many cubic centimeters the car has available. So they asked us, okay, but this is a hybrid car. So no, this is a full electric car. And they said, oh, well, I think you are the first one ever to cross the Russian border with a full electric car, and we simply don't have the right forms. So one way or the other, they solved the problem, managed to get us in the computer system, which crashed. I don't know if that was our fault, but we had to wait another 5 hours at the border before the computer system could be rebooted, and we arrived only at 2, 3 o'clock in the night in Kaliningrad. But okay, this is part of the fun. Language-wise, I just show you here a picture of a charging station to the left in Russia. Russians simply expect you to speak Russian, so you have to be very creative to find out what's written here. But even in Sweden, one of the applications was in Swedish only. Well, if you speak a Germanic language, then you sort of can guess, you know, what is written here. But of course, if you you would expect the Swedish to be more friendly towards foreigners and having an English version available. So these are the two drives. So there is now a possibility for you to ask any questions if you want. So you can, like I mentioned, you can use the box to the right of your screen to type in any question you have. If that's not the case, then please keep them to the end of the presentation, and I'll move to the next, and that's the providers, and I'll be talking a little bit more about costs. And you see, it's Wild West in charging land. Several providers are jumping on this market and try to get a share of this market. First of all, you have the early movers, the one that are dedicated charging providers, like, for example, Ionity, which I mentioned before, Fastnet in the Netherlands, expanding now in Germany, and Greenway, which is active in Poland and Slovakia. The electricity companies, the electricity generators, the multinationals have been a bit slow, but are now speeding up as well. Good examples are E.ON from Germany or Vattenfall from Sweden. And the petrol companies, of course, logical that they also, with their existing infrastructure, would like to get part of this market. Like Shell, that has bought New Motion and rebranded it to Shell Recharge, but also the Hungarian MOL has its own brand. It's called MOL Pluggy, and they're heavily now building fast charging stations throughout the country. And last but not least, the roaming providers. It works similar to you, for example, with your mobile phone. If you go to another country, you still can use with your existing contract. You can activate and have your phone calls. Two of the strongest market actors is the Plug Surfin and the German Einfach Stromladen. And I really hope that they manage to expand their roaming agreements with local providers as much as possible, so that basically you would also only need one token like this to travel in Europe through different countries. And it's really still emerging because, for example, with E.ON, if you use the E.ON Hungary app, you cannot activate an E.ON Germany charging station. The same is with Shell Recharge. Shell has 2 fast charging stations in Hungary, but you cannot use the Shell charging card to activate it. So I guess this is just startup hiccups, but I hope these barriers will be lifted soon. And how much did it cost? I did a comparison of the 2 trips for 2 persons, and to the left you see the trip from Irota to Zevenum, and I compared that with a trip with a plane. And as you can see, car electric is cheaper, was cheaper, although not significant. The main reason here is that taking the overnight train and transporting your car is still relatively expensive. As a result, it was not that much cheaper than going by plane. The Baltic Sea trip, however, was much cheaper compared to using a fossil car. I mean, our old car is a diesel car, but even if you have a petrol car, the difference is not that big. But we spent approximately 70 euros only on charging our car for 4,500 kilometers. That's of course not sustainable, and the reason is that many of the charging stations are for free. In Lithuania, for example, they were all free, and of course it's more than logic that at some point you have to pay for the energy you charge. At the moment, they're using different charging models. So some providers charge per kilowatt hour, others charge per minute that you're connected to the charger, and some even simply ask you a fixed price, independent on how much electricity you use. However, I expect this to change, and I expect that you would have 2 price models emerging in the market. First one is simply you pay a fixed price or a price for the amount of kilowatt hours you consume, and I expect this to range from 25 to 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And the other model is where you have a subscription fee, a monthly fee, and then you pay an, of course, lower kilowatt hour price. How's the situation in Hungary? Just comparing with fossil, if you charge at home, which is always the cheapest option, your fuel costs are 60% lower compared to fossil, even with the low petrol prices today. If you charge at a street charger, you're about 30% cheaper. Then I moved to carbon emissions, and this was, as I mentioned, an important driver for me to switch to electric driving. However, electric driving is not emissions-free, as the electricity has to be generated. It's only carbon-free if you generate the electricity yourself with solar panels. And it's not very easy to determine what are the emissions associated with electricity, because it very much depends on the country where you are and also at the time of charging. And I'm going to show you a live picture on the carbon intensity of electricity in Europe. But just keep this in mind, the break-even point is 1,000 kilograms CO2 per kilowatt hour. So if the electricity production is above that, then driving electric is even more polluting than to fossil. If it's below, then you're emitting less carbon compared to fossil. So let me just switch to one moment. And if it's, yeah, you can now see the map of Europe, and each country has a different color. The more greener the country is, the less carbon it emits for producing electricity. The browner a country is, the more polluting it is. And I just show you two extremes. For example, Poland is using mainly using brown coal to lignite to produce electricity. And as you can see, the carbon intensity here is 636. It's high, but at least it's still below the 1,000 break-even point. If we go to France, for example, it is very low. And if I click on the country, you can also see why it's so low. Because the majority of the electricity in France is generated by nuclear power plants, which have 0 emissions. But you can also see the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, and they also have hydro. Coal is very limited. Gas is also very limited. Just switching to Poland, and here you can see a breakdown of how much, you know, that the majority of the electricity is produced with coal. Just showing Hungary, which is fairly low, and two reasons. First of all, because of PAX, you can actually see that one block is out of operation. 3 or 4 blocks are operating, but the sun is shining outside. I don't know what the situation is in Budapest, but here the sun is shining, and you can see that there is quite some solar energy produced. This app also takes into account imports and exports, which is, for example, also important for Hungary, because as you can see, Hungary is importing at the moment quite a lot from Austria, and which is fairly green. We go to an if I only show you without import and export, you can, for example, see that Estonia is very brown, and that's because they are using shale oil as a fuel, which is the most polluting fuel you can use. However, as of a couple of months, they are importing most of the electricity from Finland, and as a result, the numbers are not that bad. So let me go back to the presentation. And I calculated the carbon emissions for the trip. One moment. And here you can see again compared it between plane and electric car, and electric car versus diesel car, and the emissions are considerably lower. For the Baltic trip, they were still on the high side, but that's because we crossed through Poland twice, and as I showed you just now, that Poland still has a fairly high carbon intensity. However, the message here is, as we are switching to renewable energy, more solar plants are getting to the grid, coal is being taken off the grid, the trend for carbon emissions, electric is going down, if not to 0. For fossil fuel cars, efficiencies maybe increase 1-2%, but much more. And I'm not talking about the same for planes. There is no alternative carbon-free technology in sight for flying. The best is, of course, your own generation, and that's actually what we are doing. Here you can see our solar system consisting of 16 panels. And just to give you an idea, if you would be driving 20,000 kilometers a year, you would need 9 panels, so about half of this system to supply sufficient electricity to your car. The other half you could use then for your household. Electric driving in Hungary. Like everywhere in Europe, the charging infrastructure is developing rapidly. Over the past 2.5 years, we had a 5-fold of charging locations. We are now at 1,000 at the moment. Also, the sales of full electric cars is going up. It's up 40% in 2019 compared to 2018. The Hungarian government announced a new support program just last week to support the purchase of full electric cars, which ranges from 500,000 to 2.5 million forints, which is quite significant, I would say. And last but not least, if you have a green number plate, so that includes hybrid cars, you can park for free in almost all cities in Hungary. And just here a view of the fast charging network in Hungary. It's at the moment still mainly concentrated around Budapest, but you see also here on the highway, these are, for example, MOL stations. They are popping up along the highways. And who provide charging in Hungary? Well, first of all, charging at home is still the cheapest. You just pay a 37 forints or 11 euro cents per kilowatt hour. But if you go to providers with the largest network, you come to Mobility, which recently purchased eMobi, and it was for free until the 1st of May, but from 1st of May they start charging 80 forints per kilowatt hour. And also Elmu EMAS is very active, charging you 99 forints per kilowatt hour. New kids on the block. E.ON is launching fast charging networks in cooperation with Aldi supermarkets. The petrol stations like Lukoil, Shell, and MOL, and as I mentioned, Ionity, they just opened one charging station on the way to the Balaton Lake. What's the outlook? What do I see happening in the electric car market? Well, first of all, we see an enormous amount of new models entering the car, and they're both low end. They are cheaper. They have a limited range, but very well suitable to drive within a city or within a country. And it is in fact for the cheaper models, you can get the 2.5 million state support for purchasing. So if a car would cost, let's say, 10 million forints, 25% is paid through this support scheme. On the high end, you see longer range models arriving, and also interesting enough that the charging capacity is increasing dramatically. As I mentioned, Ionity can charge or can supply 350 kilowatt. There are no cars yet that can absorb that enormous amount of power, but the newest models could even go up to 300 kilowatts. So that means that if you have a charge which would normally take you half an hour, 1 hour, within 10 minutes you have a full battery. Another interesting development is that there are plans to use car batteries also to store renewable energy and to stabilize the grid. So if you connect your car when you're not using it to the grid, you can also start supplying electricity to the grid or store it, and even get paid for it. So according to some of the estimations I've seen, you could earn another 100,000, 150,000 forints by offering your car as a storage unit. But will they get bottlenecks? Because now there are not that many cars, but what will happen if Friday evening everybody takes its electric car, drives to the Balaton Lake, and apart from the traffic jams, will there be enough charging stations to help everybody? There are some interesting developments here as well, and one of the one I want to show that's in the Ruhr area in Germany. It's called Kreuzhilden, and over there they're building a charging unit which consists of 62 fast chargers, and that's enormous. They also will have their own generation with solar panels with a total power of 750 kilowatt peak, which is quite significant. At the same time, they also want to store the electricity that they generated and be able to supply it at a later stage to the electric car. So these are very exciting and interesting developments that are taking place in Europe. A wrap up. So my experience so far, for regular distance trips, the electric car has proven itself. It's working. If you stay within the city or you stay within the country, it's all fine. Long distance trips, however, still require a lot of planning and the preparation. But let's hope that developments are going very quick. That in 1-2 years, some of the bottlenecks that I've noticed on our 2 trips will have been alleviated. Also nice, the maintenance cost of an electric car are much lower than a fossil car. And of course, the car that we bought only has been driving now for half a year. But what I read from in the news is that the average maintenance cost is just 35,000 forints or 100 euros a year, and that's because there are hardly any items that need to be maintained. But also, driving an electric car is a pleasure. There's no gear, there's no clutch, for example. You have regenerative braking, meaning that you don't use your brake in normal circumstances, but you just let your pedal go. You release your pedal, and the motor will do the braking and will feed back the electricity back into the battery for later use. So this is a very efficient way of slowing speed. And last but not least, enjoy the silence. Driving an electric car is a very silent experience. We are also at our holiday resort doing our share. In the coming 2 weeks, we will be building our own charging stations for our guests. As you can see, the north of Hungary is still fairly empty in terms of charging possibilities. But we hope that in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we can receive our first guests with their electric car. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Sorry, it took me a bit longer than expected. I hope you are still awake, but I would like to run the third poll. And actually it's the same one, the same as we asked before my presentation. And please indicate which type of car you will purchase in the future. So I hope I haven't scared you off. 56% voted. I hope it works now with everybody. Okay, I'm going to close it now and share you the results. So it's 11, 21, 53%. I see that some people even decided not to buy a car anymore. Well, let me just go back to the same poll before the presentation. So I see that, oh, that's very good. In more people are thinking of buying an electric car. So fossil is has remained the same. The hybrid went from 42% to 21%, and the electric driving went from 38 to 53%. So apparently, I didn't scare you too much with my presentation. So this brings me to the end. I'm just showing here you some useful websites if you want to get more information. The route planner I've used is called a better route planner. For looking up charging stations, you can use a PlugShare. For news and information about electric driving, there is a very good Hungarian language website, which is called the Villain Autoshock. And the carbon intensity of the grid, which I just showed you, is you can find at electricitymap.org. So that brings us to the question and answer session. Beata, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to remind you that there are several questions coming in. So if you also see them, then you can open up the question box.
Yeah. So please feel free to type in any question. Yes, a question from Dan Swartz. What happens when you run out of charge on the highway? You cannot just walk to the next gas station with a can. Good question. There are two solutions. You would have to call your car supplier. I know that Hyundai has a special service, and they will pick up your car and tow you to the next charging station for free. The other solution is a mobile charging station, and I've seen that actually quite recently, which is a small truck with batteries in it, and they drive to your car and then charge you just enough so that you can reach your next charging station. Next, can I ask you how much the cost was to take the car by train from Hungary to Czech Republic? Good question. I believe it was 200 euros for a return trip from Košice to Prague, including a sleeping cabin for 2 persons. 200 to 240. I'm not sure, but if you want to know for sure, I can look it up for you later. Then why do you need a charging card? Question by Dan Swartz again. Can't you just pay by app like the e-bikes and e-scooters? Yes, you can. Use an app only, but of course you would have to insert your credit card details, similar to e-bikes and scooters. It's just sometimes time consuming, so that's why they've created these physical keys, because it's simply for convenience that you just tap it, the charge will start, and you can go for a coffee or for a lunch. Same question once more. What's the cost of a train trip from Košice to Prague? Already answered. Does this contain imported electricity? I assume that this question relates to the carbon emissions I showed, and yes, indeed, that this includes the imported electricity. So what I did during the trip, each time I put the car on the charger, I went to the website electricitymap.org and checked the actual carbon intensity and wrote it down. It would actually be nice if there would be apps that could automatically, or if the service provider could automatically calculate for you your carbon emissions for each charge. Next question is by Benze. Thank you for the summary. Really good presentation. Thank you. There is the app where you can search for charging stations and see if they're occupied or not. Yes, the good question. So the apps that are directly from the service provider normally show you whether a charging station is occupied or not. The general apps, like for example the PlugShare, normally does not show whether a charger is available or not. Yes, that's question. The second question from Ben's. Do you see the future as you charge your car or replace the batteries which you can exchange at stations, for example, which would take out the time of charging the car? Providers would take care of it. I've read about an Englishman who already developed these batteries. Yes, that's an idea that's floating around for a longer time, where indeed you would go to a charging station, you would take out the battery, get a new one, and the old battery will be recharged for the next user. As such, it sounds as a good idea. The thing is, it would require the car manufacturers to standardize the car batteries, which is unlikely to happen. And secondly, car batteries are quite heavy and big, and they have done their utmost best to integrate the battery as much in the car so that the car doesn't get too big or that the inside of the car doesn't get too small. As a result, it's not easy to find a technology, to find a structure to get the battery out quickly and get it back in. So honestly speaking, I don't think this idea is going to fly. Another question, Dan, again. With such a silent car and no clutch or gear shift, don't you fall asleep? Yes and no. There is also, if you put on cruise control, indeed, I have to make sure that I don't start playing with my mobile phone, because it can be indeed a bit, well, not boring, but yeah, it's so silent and you have nothing to do. Our car also does keeping the lane, is also available to tag along a preceding car. So yes, you have to be careful that you don't lose attention. And on top of that, I have to say that it also shows that, or it feels that if you're not steering, if you let the steer go, if you don't touch it, it starts making a noise and warns you to to put your hands back on the steering wheel. Question by Henk. What about footprint of manufacturing the battery pack and base material mining? Yes, that's a good question. Of course, making a battery or making any car has a footprint and has a carbon footprint. That's still the situation that we are in a fossil fuel based world. But it's the same with the first solar panel and the first wind turbine. When it was produced, it used electricity that was still fossil fuel based. But once the solar panel and the wind turbine came to the grid, it started producing renewable electricity for the next one. So once we start shifting away from fossil fuel, it also means that all these new cars can be built with a limited carbon footprint. Your second part of the question is about base material mining. You know, there is lithium, there is cobalt that has to come from discussable mines in Congo, for example. So yes, that's you know, if electric driving really starts to take off, there could be a shortage of supply. On the other hand, there are so many developments on alternative batteries, so not using lithium, not using cobalt. So I hope that within a couple of years we can, or they can, manufacture batteries that do not use rare materials. What about light year 1 from Frido? Frido, are you referring, maybe you can put the question again, but are you referring to this Chinese model that's coming on the market? Dutch. I have not heard about this car, Frido, so I cannot answer your question. I see still quite a lot of questions. I will speed up a little bit. Do you expect to be able to sell this car in 3 years' time? I understand residual value is very low, estimated by leasing companies. Thank you. By Dora. Yes, I do expect it to be able to sell it. And the old story is a bit that they expected the batteries to degrade very quickly, meaning that instead of 100%, they would, for example, only can store 80% or even lower. However, the latest experience shows that battery degradation is going much slower than initially expected. And the percentage that I've heard is that the battery degrades about 1% per year only. So meaning a car being 10 years old still has 90% of its capacity available. To be seen, because there is theory, there is practice, but the first results show that it's not that quickly degrading as expected. Another question by Stefan. Do you think the future? Don't you think the future will be for hybrid cars instead of full electric ones? Electric use in city and hybrid fuel in countryside. This will also avoid the stress to have empty battery in middle of nowhere. Good point. Yes, that's why you see that the majority of the non-fossil fuel cars are hybrid. Yes, you do not have the stress. However, as I expect, is that with the increasing infrastructure, that stress will be over within 2 to 3 years. So because the disadvantage of a hybrid car is that you basically have two cars. You have an electric one and you have a fossil fuel one, meaning that the maintenance costs of an hybrid car are as high or even higher than a regular fossil car. How much did you save by having local charging cards instead of roaming universal solutions? A question by Tibor. Quite a lot actually, because the plug surfing normally has a markup of 10 to 15%, although in the Baltic states they don't have roaming agreements yet, so I couldn't even use it. But sometimes the not using a local charging card could even double or triple a charging cost. That was really surprising to me, that where you normally, when you paid or you could pay 10 cents per kilowatt hour, if you used a roaming supplier, it was triple, like 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, that's the last question posed, and also brings me to the end of my webinar. Before I give the word back to Beate, I would like to thank Beate for making this webinar possible and organizing it, and also would like to thank Roger Browns for tips on how to do a webinar. And last but not least, to all the participants, thank you for your time. I see we went over the time limit, so I hope I didn't impose something on your personal schedule. Beate?
Thank you, Lennard. I think your presentation was very practical and informative. I also learned a lot about electric cars. I haven't drive one myself, but I was a guest in one of these cars. It's really silent, so that was a good question, whether you fall asleep or not during driving a so silent car. But indeed, the future is in electric driving. So thank you for all the details about your own experiences. I thank the guests for joining us this afternoon, and I would like to let you know that we continuously organize webinars in different topics. So if you check our website or sign up for our newsletter, which is also possible on our website, then you can stay updated on the upcoming events. And I really hope that early autumn or in October, we can also see each other in person when the quarantine is over. But for the time being, we can meet in the virtual space. So thank you again for joining us, and also Lennard for the presentation.
Okay, thank you, and bye-bye to everybody.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.